A woman wants the man who lets go because his detachment reveals strength, self-respect, and emotional maturity. He isn't controlled by fear or neediness. His ability to walk away creates space, balance, and desire. She feels drawn to the man who chooses himself, not the one who clings to her. Letting go is one of the highest expressions of emotional self-sufficiency. It is the moment a man stops gripping, stops forcing, stops trying to shape an outcome that only drains his power. When a man chooses to let go, he is not saying he doesn't care. He is saying he cares about himself enough to stop fighting for what isn't feeding his soul. There is a difference between abandoning something out of fear and releasing something out of strength. When a man lets go, it is strength. It is clarity. It is the quiet understanding that nothing real requires begging, chasing, or emotional sacrifice. A woman feels the shift instantly. She can sense when a man's energy is coming from need and when it is coming from fullness. Neediness feels heavy. It suffocates connection. It creates pressure she never asked for. But a man who lets go carries a different kind of presence, calm, centered, and rooted in himself. She doesn't feel responsible for his emotions. She doesn't feel like she must carry the relationship for him. Instead, she becomes aware that this man has a life, a purpose, a spine, and an emotional backbone that does not crumble just because things don't go his way. Letting go is emotional self-sufficiency because it shows he is connected to himself more than he is attached to the outcome. He isn't waiting to be chosen. He isn't waiting to be validated. He isn't waiting for someone else to tell him he is worthy. He already knows. That inner knowing is what makes him powerful, and that power is what makes him attractive. Women don't want a man who needs them to breathe. They want a man who chooses them freely while still being able to walk away if the connection becomes one-sided. When a man lets go, he removes himself from emotional dependency. He no longer hands someone else the power to define how he feels about himself. He stops reacting to every shift in her mood. He stops trying to win a battle that only drains his dignity. Letting go becomes his way back to himself, his priorities, his balance, his inner peace. He stops trying to control what is not his to control and focuses instead on the one thing that is, his own energy. A man who lets go is not cold. He is courageous. It takes courage to release what you want because you refuse to lose yourself in the process of holding on. It takes inner discipline to step back, to breathe, to trust, and to accept that not everything is meant to be kept. And it takes wisdom to know that sometimes letting go is the only way to let something rebuild itself naturally. Women gravitate toward men who carry this energy because it shows maturity. It shows he is capable of loving without losing himself. It shows he can give without collapsing. It shows he can feel deeply yet stand firmly. Letting go is not walking away from love. It's walking toward emotional freedom. Detachment is one of the most misunderstood forms of strength. People often confuse it with coldness, apathy, or emotional distance, but true detachment has nothing to do with being indifferent. It is a discipline, an inner mastery that allows a man to stay grounded even when emotions, expectations, or relationships try to pull him off balance. A man who practices detachment isn't avoiding connection. He is refusing to lose himself inside it. He feels everything, but he is not ruled by anything. Detachment signals inner strength because it requires self-awareness. It demands emotional maturity. It forces a man to confront his fears, fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of being alone, and rise above them. Most men cling because they are afraid. They chase because they doubt their own worth. They overgive because they hope someone else will give their identity meaning. But a man rooted in detachment doesn't operate from fear. He knows that real confidence isn't loud. It is steady, calm, and unshakable. He doesn't hold on tightly to anyone because he trusts himself enough to know he will be okay with or without them. This kind of detachment creates a powerful energy. A woman can feel the difference instantly. A man who is indifferent feels empty, closed off, uninterested, disconnected from life. But a man who is detached feels centered. He listens without reacting, cares without collapsing, and stays present without losing his sense of self. She feels his strength not because he holds back, but because he refuses to let emotions dictate his words, actions, or decisions. Detachment also shows discipline. It proves that he has control over his impulses instead of letting his impulses control him. When conflict arises, he doesn't explode. When she pulls away, he doesn't panic. When something changes, he doesn't cling. He lets things unfold naturally because he knows force only creates resistance. And this discipline makes him appear emotionally powerful, not just to her, but to himself. He becomes the man who doesn't respond from insecurity, doesn't react from fear, and doesn't beg for reassurance. His stability becomes a quiet form of dominance. Women are drawn to this energy because it creates emotional safety. A detached man isn't unpredictable. He isn't exhausting. He isn't dependent on her responses to feel valuable. She doesn't feel pressured to manage his emotions. She doesn't feel trapped by his expectations. Instead, she feels free to be herself. That freedom creates comfort, respect, and desire. What detachment really shows is a man's ability to choose himself first, not out of selfishness, but out of self-respect. He can love deeply, but he doesn't lose his identity in the process. He can care intensely, but he doesn't surrender his standards. He can want her, but he doesn't need her to validate him. Indifference says, I don't care. Detachment says, I care, but I am still in control. And that difference is exactly what makes detachment so magnetic, so powerful, and so undeniably attractive. Letting go is one of the most liberating acts in a relationship because it instantly dissolves the pressure that suffocates connection. When a man clings, pushes, or forces outcomes, he unintentionally creates tension. Tension she feels emotionally, mentally, and sometimes even physically. She begins to sense that his happiness depends on her responses, his stability depends on her approval, and his identity depends on her presence. That pressure is what makes her pull away. Not because she doesn't care, but because she can't breathe under the weight of someone else's emotional expectations. Letting go changes everything. The moment he steps back, the air clears, the pressure lifts. She no longer feels like she's being watched, measured, or tested. She no longer feels like she must respond perfectly or show up constantly to keep him emotionally afloat. She gets space, not to detach from him, but to reconnect with herself. And that space is essential in attraction. It's the space where curiosity grows, where longing builds, where her mind returns to him instead of running away from him. When a man lets go, he's not abandoning the connection. He's removing the unnecessary tension that was pushing her away. He's returning the relationship to a natural rhythm. He's giving her room to contribute instead of feeling obligated. Instead of pushing for reassurance, he lets things flow. Instead of chasing, he allows her to come toward him in her own time and in her own way. That freedom is what often brings her closer, far closer than pressure ever could. Space also gives clarity. When there is constant pressure, neither person can see clearly. Emotions feel reactive instead of grounded. Everything feels urgent, dramatic, or heavy. But space calms the system. It allows both people to reflect without fear. It lets her ask herself real questions. Do I miss him? Do I value him? Was I taking him for granted? Do I want to rebuild this connection? Those answers can only surface when there is room to think, feel, and breathe. Letting go also allows her feminine energy to relax. A woman cannot open emotionally when she feels controlled or monitored. She needs space to soften, space to choose, space to release her guard. When a man backs off, it signals trust, a trust in himself, in the connection, and in her. That trust creates safety, and where there is safety, there is desire. For him, letting go creates space to return to his own center. It grounds him, it pulls him away from emotional chaos and back into self-focus, purpose, and self-respect. When he stops pushing, he reconnects with his own life. That shift in energy is magnetic. She notices when his world no longer revolves around her. She notices when he reclaims his rhythm. That space makes him more attractive, not because he's trying to be, but because he's finally not trying at all. Letting go doesn't end connection. It renews it. It releases the pressure that drains love and creates the space where it can breathe again. Letting go is one of the purest and strongest expressions of self-respect a man can show. It requires him to rise above his emotions, above his fears, and above the need to be approved or chosen. When a man lets go, he is not giving up. He is choosing himself. He is choosing dignity over desperation, clarity over confusion, and inner peace over emotional chaos. And that choice speaks louder than anything he could ever say. A man who respects himself doesn't fight for a place where he is not welcomed. He doesn't cling to someone who treats him as an option. He doesn't bargain for attention or beg for the bare minimum. Letting go becomes his boundary, the line he draws around his worth. It's the moment he says, I know who I am, and I refuse to stay where I'm not valued. That statement alone shifts the energy in every dynamic, especially with a woman. Women can feel when a man's self-respect is intact. It shows in how he carries himself, how he communicates, and how he reacts to disappointment. A man without self-respect tries to prove himself. A man with self-respect simply shows himself. He doesn't plead for her to stay. He doesn't chase after mixed signals. He doesn't twist himself into versions she might like. Instead, he steps back with grace. He gives her the freedom to choose while giving himself the freedom to walk away. This is why letting go is magnetic. It reflects an identity that is not built around someone else's validation. Women are not attracted to men who collapse when they're challenged. They're not drawn to men who fall apart when faced with silence or distance. They feel safe with the man who stands firm, even when it hurts. The man who lets go communicates through his actions that he trusts himself, that he knows his value is not negotiable, and that he will not compromise his integrity just to keep a connection alive. Letting go is also an act of emotional responsibility. A self-respecting man refuses to stay in situations that drain him, confuse him, or make him feel unworthy. He doesn't allow himself to be treated poorly because he understands that whatever he tolerates becomes his new standard. When he lets go, he is saying he deserves better, even if he hasn't seen better yet. He is choosing faith in his future rather than fear of being alone. And the truth is, letting go often brings clarity to the woman as well. When he stops overextending, she begins to see his worth. When he stops explaining his value, she begins to recognize it. When he stops holding on, she begins to question what she is losing. His self-respect forces her to reflect on her own behavior. It creates a shift that only strength can create. But he doesn't let go to win her back. He lets go to honor himself. A man may love deeply, but when he chooses self-respect over attachment, he becomes unstoppable. He shows that his heart is open, but his standards are firm. He proves that he can care for someone else without abandoning himself. And that is the kind of man a woman never forgets. Letting go ends the power struggle because it takes the game out of the relationship. Most conflicts between men and women are not about love. They're about control. Who cares more? Who cares less? Who will text first? Who is pulling away? Who is trying harder? And who is winning the silent battle of ego? These unspoken dynamics turn relationships into emotional tug-of-war matches where both people are too busy protecting their pride to actually protect the connection. But the moment a man lets go, the entire battlefield collapses. There is nothing left to fight over, nothing left to manipulate, nothing left to prove. A power struggle only exists when two people are competing for emotional leverage. When a man steps back, he refuses to participate in that competition. He no longer reacts to mixed signals. He no longer responds to emotional tests. He no longer fights to convince someone of his value. He simply steps out of the arena, and that act alone removes the fuel that was feeding the struggle. The dynamic stops feeling like a constant chase, constant overthinking, or constant imbalance. Everything becomes quiet, clear, and honest. Women can feel this shift immediately. When he lets go, she senses that the emotional tug she once had no longer works. The push and pull stops pulling him emotionally. The silent treatments no longer shake him. The distance no longer threatens him. He becomes unmoved, not because he doesn't care, but because he refuses to let immature dynamics dictate his behavior. That calmness forces her to confront her own patterns. She no longer gets to rely on the emotional reactions she was used to. The control she thought she had disappears the moment he emotionally detaches from the game. Letting go also brings truth to the surface. When a man is chasing or proving himself, the woman never truly sees his value. She only sees his effort. But when he steps back, she is forced to look at the reality of the connection without the illusion of pursuit. She begins to question her own investment, her own behavior, and her own desires. Instead of playing the game, she finally sees the man. She sees his strength, his boundaries, and his self-worth. That clarity can make her realize the struggle was never with him. It was with herself. Letting go doesn't mean he stops caring. It means he stops fighting for something that's meant to flow. When he stops pushing, the relationship regains its natural balance. There is no more competition for attention, no more silent wars, no more emotional tugging. Letting go creates space for genuine connection to replace the games that were blocking intimacy. Most importantly, letting go protects his peace. He stops sacrificing his emotional energy to win a relationship that should never require winning. He withdraws his power from the struggle and places it back into himself. That shift makes him stronger, calmer, and more confident. It transforms him from someone trying to control the dynamic to someone who controls his own energy. And that's when the power struggle ends, not because he defeated her, but because he refused to play. Women crave the energy of a man who isn't afraid to lose her because that energy reflects something deeper than confidence. It reflects inner wholeness. A man who is not afraid to lose a woman stands in a place of emotional freedom. He is not driven by fear, insecurity, or the desperate need to be chosen. His value does not rise or fall based on anyone's presence. She can feel that instantly. It's a rare energy in a world where most men cling, chase, and negotiate their worth. A man who isn't afraid to lose her shows that he belongs to himself first. This type of man isn't cold. He's centered. He can love deeply, but he doesn't depend on her to define him. He can be vulnerable, but he won't collapse if she walks away. His emotional stability makes him powerful. His independence makes him magnetic. Women notice this immediately because his presence feels different. He doesn't seek constant reassurance. He doesn't crumble when things get uncertain. He doesn't react out of panic when she pulls back. Instead, he stays grounded, composed, and unmoved by temporary shifts. That steadiness is attractive because it creates safety. She knows this man won't lose himself in the relationship. She knows he has a life beyond her. She knows he chooses her, not because he needs someone, but because he wants her specifically. Fear of loss makes men behave in ways that kill attraction. They over-pursue. They over-explain. They over-attach. They try to secure the relationship through effort instead of presence. But a man who isn't afraid to lose her doesn't operate from fear. He operates from truth. He understands that love cannot be forced. He knows that genuine connection doesn't require begging or bargaining. He trusts that what is meant for him will flow toward him, not away from him. And that trust, rooted in strength, not arrogance, is what women feel drawn toward. This energy also places responsibility back on her. When he isn't afraid to lose her, the dynamic shifts. She realizes he will not tolerate disrespect or inconsistency. She realizes he won't chase after mixed signals. She realizes she has to show up with effort, not just expectation. Women value men who do not fold under pressure. They value men who expect mutual investment. They value men who stand firm in their standards. When she senses he will walk away if the connection becomes one-sided, she feels both respect and desire. She knows this man values himself enough to expect the same from her. A man who isn't afraid to lose her also becomes unpredictable in the best way. He's not driven by attachment, he's driven by alignment. He doesn't stay because he's afraid to be alone. He stays because he feels the connection is right. That makes his presence genuine. She never feels like he's with her just to have someone. She feels chosen, not needed. And that difference is powerful. A man who needs her drains her. A man who chooses her inspires her. At the core of it all, women crave the man who isn't afraid to lose her because that man is whole, secure, and emotionally free. He is not held hostage by the fear of her absence. He is guided by the strength of his own identity, and that makes him the kind of man a woman doesn't want to lose. Letting go forces her to see her own contribution because it removes the emotional cushion she has been relying on. As long as a man is chasing, overgiving, or constantly trying to fix the connection, she never truly has to confront her own behavior. She doesn't reflect. She doesn't question her actions. She doesn't examine how she shows up because his effort hides the imbalance. But the moment he lets go, the mirror turns toward her. Suddenly, she has to face the part she played. When a man steps back, he removes the emotional labor he was carrying alone. He stops initiating every conversation. He stops smoothing every conflict. He stops being the one who always tries to bring things back together. That shift exposes the truth, whether she was meeting him halfway or simply letting him do everything. Letting go forces her to evaluate if she was contributing, reciprocating, and valuing the connection, or if she was taking his presence for granted. Without his constant effort filling the gaps, those gaps become impossible to ignore. This moment often creates a wake-up call. She begins to feel the silence she once dismissed. She notices the distance she once believed would never affect him. She realizes that his energy wasn't guaranteed and his love wasn't unconditional, regardless of her actions. She starts to see where she fell short, not because he blames her, but because his absence makes the imbalance visible. Letting go is powerful because it dismantles her sense of emotional entitlement. When a man keeps showing up no matter how she behaves, she unconsciously believes the connection depends only on his resilience. She thinks she can pull away without consequences. She assumes he will always stay, always try, always fight. But when he lets go, reality shifts. She realizes effort is a two-way exchange, not a one-sided expectation. She sees that relationships don't survive on his emotional strength alone. They survive on mutual investment. This is also the moment she begins to confront her own emotional patterns. Was she withholding affection? Was she inconsistent? Was she using his stability as a safety net? Was she relying on his pursuit to feel validated? Letting go confronts her with questions she avoided when he was still doing all the emotional work. His silence becomes a spotlight on her own heart. And something unexpected happens. She starts to appreciate what he brought into her life. The attention, the care, the consistency, things she may have taken lightly become clearer in his absence. She feels the loss of what she thought she could always get back. Letting go doesn't just make her see him differently, it makes her see herself differently. It makes her understand that connection requires responsibility, not just desire. Most importantly, letting go gives her the emotional space to take ownership. She can no longer hide behind the narrative that he didn't do enough. She sees that he stopped trying because she didn't show up with the same heart, effort, or intention. She realizes that if she wants him, she has to contribute, not through words or promises, but through action. Letting go doesn't punish her. It awakens her. It opens her eyes to her own role, her own accountability, and her own desire to rebuild what she once overlooked. It makes her recognize the value of what she's at risk of losing and the responsibility she must carry if she wants to keep it. Walking away rebalances attraction because it restores the natural dynamic that gets lost when a man overextends himself. When he is chasing, overinvesting, or trying too hard to keep her interested, the balance shifts. She becomes the evaluator and he becomes the persuader. She stands still while he moves toward her. That imbalance kills the very spark he's trying to keep alive. But the moment he walks away, everything reverses. Suddenly, the dynamic shifts from pressure to polarity, from expectation to curiosity, from predictability to mystery, and that shift ignites attraction again. When a man walks away, he reclaims emotional equilibrium. He is no longer giving more than he receives. He is no longer sacrificing his dignity for attention. He is no longer trying to earn a place in someone's life. Instead, he chooses himself. That choice alone changes the energy. A woman can feel when a man withdraws his overinvestment. She feels the absence of his effort, his attention, and his emotional availability. And that absence forces her to reevaluate the connection. Her mind naturally moves toward what is no longer guaranteed. Walking away rebalances attraction because it reminds her that his presence is a privilege, not a given. When he walks away, she notices what she was taking for granted. She begins to miss the energy she once assumed would always be there. She becomes aware of the value he brought and the emotional stability he provided. This awareness shifts her from passive to active. Instead of being the one who is pursued, she now becomes the one who feels the desire to pursue, to reconnect, and to contribute. A woman's attraction grows in the space where she gets to choose, not in the space where she feels pressured. When a man pulls back, he creates emotional space. She has room to reflect, to feel, to question, to desire. Without his constant presence, her curiosity returns. She wonders what he's doing, how he's feeling, and whether he still cares. That curiosity is one of the strongest forms of attraction because it draws her toward him naturally, not forcefully. Walking away also removes the emotional imbalance created by insecurity. When a man acts from fear, fear of losing her, fear of being replaced, fear of not being enough, his energy becomes needy. Neediness repels because it signals self-doubt. But the moment he walks away, his energy becomes grounded again. He steps back into self-value, and that shift makes him more attractive. She senses his emotional independence, and that independence makes him stand out. This change in dynamic brings back polarity, the natural pull between masculine stability and feminine openness. When he walks away, he re-enters his masculine energy, calm, decisive, and self-respecting. This invites her back into her feminine energy, receptive, reflective, and emotionally attuned. Suddenly, the connection feels alive again, not forced. Walking away doesn't manipulate her. It resets the energy. It removes what was draining the attraction and restores what was missing. Balance, respect, and mutual investment. It allows her to see his worth without the noise of his constant presence. It gives her space to step forward instead of always stepping back. When a man walks away, not out of anger, but out of self-respect, he returns the relationship to its natural center. And in that center, attraction recovers, desire grows, and clarity appears. Walking away doesn't end the connection, it corrects it. In the end, the power of letting go is not about losing someone, it's about finding yourself. Every shift in energy, every moment of detachment, every step back is a declaration of self-respect. When a man stops forcing connection, he stops shrinking. He returns to his center, his standards, and his emotional strength. And from that place, everything changes. The woman no longer sees a man trying to prove his worth. She sees a man who already knows it. She no longer feels pressured. She feels drawn. She no longer focuses on control. She begins to reflect, to appreciate, and to choose. Letting go reshapes the entire dynamic because it reveals truth. Truth about her, truth about him, and truth about the connection itself. A man who can walk away holds the strongest position in any relationship, not because he is cold, but because he is whole. His presence becomes intentional, not desperate. His love becomes powerful, not dependent. His value becomes undeniable, not negotiated. This is why letting go transforms everything. It brings clarity, restores balance, reignites attraction, and reveals the deeper layers of human connection. It shows that real love cannot be won through pressure, fear, or pursuit. It grows in the space where self-worth leads the way.